Today we're discussing decisions for drought-affected producers. And to help us with this, we are privileged to have Roger Sneath. And I'll just make him a presenter now so he can load up his slide deck for us. So Roger is a Senior Beef Extension Officer with the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry here in Queensland. Roger has spent several years in North Queensland at Charters Towers in Hughenden before moving to Dalby and more recently to Toowoomba. Unfortunately, drought has been a considerable feature in Roger's career both in North and Southern Queensland. Many of you may know him as the editor of Beef Talk, which is printed in the Queensland Country Life, or as the Secretary of the South Queensland Regional Beef Research Committee. So Roger, thanks for joining us today. Over to you. We can't quite hear you, Roger, so perhaps you're muted, but we can see your slide deck, which is great.
Great, thanks, John. Yes, hello everyone, and thanks for taking the time to attend the webinar. I'll cover 4 sections: the current situation and year ahead, options, feed supplies, and producer reflections on drought. A lot of the information that I'll present is coming from speaking with and reading information from producers and colleagues and consultants. And I know there'll be vast experience amongst participants, so I certainly welcome people's comments and contributions to help people getting through the drought. And you can send those to John anytime. Right, the next slide, hopefully popping up any minute. Right, this slide, if you saw Dave McRae's talk, I believe he may have had it, it shows the Australian rainfall relative to historical records for the last 121 years. Each decade is running down the page. If you just take a quick glance, probably the first thing that really stands out to me is that there's more red than blue, which is probably typical of Australia being an arid continent. Also the dark blue years stand out, like 74, and up in the top right-hand corner, 2010 and 11. You can also see that the 70s, looking down the 70s, is probably one of the wetter decades. Leading up to the drought, we had some good years before we moved into the failed wet season for 2012-13, and again now with only patchy rain for 13-14. The next slide, so if we start to hone in on Queensland, just looking to January this year. Oh, by the way, these maps, you can download them from the long paddock and the previous one as well. This first map is the rainfall relative to historic records from February last year to this January. And the red is showing the extremely low range, which is less than 10% of years. The second map at the bottom is pasture growth over summer from last November to this January. So we've got low rainfall, low pasture growth, and you can see the top right-hand corner shows drought-declared areas. Another major problem with the drought is low water supplies. And many people are saying this is the worst drought they have experienced. The next, if we just hone in a little more and look at monthly rainfall, we can see here the months from October on the left through to February on the right. So there's been patchy rain in November and again patchy rain in February. So pretty much everyone you talk to mentions how patchy the rain has been. Another feature of this drought, sadly, is the low cattle prices. And they've been low for all of 2013 along the bottom, the black line. And you can see with the green line that they've been dropping throughout 2012. This has certainly made it harder for people to accept selling losses, especially after they've been trying to rebuild. Nevertheless, due to the shortages of feed and water, there is widespread selling, and with meatworks are booked well ahead. So as a quick summary, we've had the failed summers. Some people are looking at 2 failed wet seasons. Cattle prices are low, feed supplies are tight and expensive. The late patchy rain is bringing some relief, but some people are still facing a second failed wet season. And now we're at the end of February, so the pasture growing season is getting shorter. So the question on many people's minds is, even if we get good rain, will there be enough pasture bulk and water to last until next summer? And also, will the pasture run to head more quickly this year? If we think about decisions, well, everybody's situation is different, and it's not always easy to know what the best thing is to do. Certainly it's good to talk with other people and get other ideas. It's good to keep a record of what's being done and when and why. It's also good to be able to evaluate objectively without blame what's working well, not so well, and what could be done differently. Not everything we do necessarily goes to plan, so we need to accept it and keep learning from it. Of course, it's all easier in hindsight, and it would be easier if we knew the future. And probably the closest thing for looking forward, and probably the best thing we have to a crystal ball, is looking at historical rainfall and pasture growth patterns. You can get rainfall data from the BOM, and also Rainman. You can Google Rainman Streamflow. That's now available for free off the web, and it will become interactive on the web. So we have a look at an example of rainfall. This one is for Roma, average rainfall. Pasture growth would pretty much follow that curve, the rainfall curve. So for tropical pastures, whatever bulk of feed is available at the end of summer growing season has to last until the end of the year, until there's good pasture growing rain that can be relied upon, which could potentially be December or January. Winter rain may give us some good high quality nutrient medics and herbage, but they're high in moisture and they don't provide a large bulk of dry matter. So irrespective of forecasts, it's really timely now to assess total feed and water supplies and estimate how many stock can be run for the rest of the year. If there's a good bulk of dry feed at the end of the dry season, say as the example number 1, then the pastures will support more head compared with if there's a low bulk of feed, say number 2. So making estimates of carrying capacity could be done from past experience or records. Another option is to use forage budgets to estimate dry matter available and stocking rates that would be appropriate to get through the year, and then with continued monitoring as well. There are 4 videos that are presented by Kyle Payton explaining dry season forage budgets, and these are available on the FutureBeef website. So to give an example, and there's one up there now, if you said that an animal was to eat 10 kilograms of dry matter per head per day, multiplied by 270 days, so for a 9-month period, that's 2,700 kilograms of dry matter one animal requires for that period. Now, if you look at 1 hectare, and if there was 300 kilograms of available feed per hectare, and this is after accounting for detachment for other animals, roos and goats, for unusable feed, and also for leaving a residual of what Cole Payton calls rain-ready pasture stubble cover. So in this case, 9 hectares times 300 kilograms per hectare available feed will supply the 2,700 kilograms for that period. So jump on the website. There's 4 of those videos available. And if you also Google, down the bottom you can see a picture of a photo standard. If you Google FutureBeef photo standards, there's a large range of those standards that you can download for different parts of Queensland. Now, some of the things we learned from the grazing land management course that the department's run, and Cole Payton's been involved with a lot. 2 of the most important grazing principles for good land condition is the dry season fodder budget, which aims at, again, having that rain-ready pasture stubble cover at the end of the year, so which will help with infiltration, retaining soil, and provide good pasture growth response in the wet season. The other one is to have wet season spell for some paddocks each year, and in order to give desirable pasture plants a bit of a holiday to strengthen up so they can outcompete undesirables. If we combine those grazing principles with some underlying grazing business principles, it might help to guide decisions. For example, it's really the pastures that generate the wealth potential of the business, not the cattle. Pastures are also the cheapest feed. So owning cattle is just one way to convert the pastures into dollars. Land in A condition is twice as productive as land in C condition, and also large-scale, long-term feeding is extremely costly as opposed to strategic supplementation or short-term feeding. Right, to summarise this section, and we'll break after sections, we're nearing the end of the summer growing season, so it's timely to reassess pastures and water supplies and adjust numbers to match those. So it's really a critical time for decisions and action. So at this stage, John, I'll hand back to you. So if there's any comments or questions.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. So there are no particular questions at the moment, but a few more people have been telling me how much rainfall they've had or not had. So one person at Roma, which is west of Maryborough, has had 0 mils, yet their average is 350. So it just emphasises how important the topic is that you're talking about today. So Roger, I know you've got a lot to get through today, so how about you move to the next section?
Thanks, John. All right. Section 2, options. And there's, I'll just pull up the next slide. People usually use a mix of options when the cattle numbers are exceeding the available pasture. So I'll just be talking about the top 5 on that list, just briefly. And we'll start off with an example of comparing selling with feeding. So say we sell animals early in the summer for $450 and then buy them back again at the end of the year for $700. There's a $250 cost there. So now we could compare that with the feeding. So in this particular scenario, for 270 days, 9 months, 270 days at $1 a day, so that's a pretty substantial feeding program, $270. So that's just a quick little example of comparing. There is a spreadsheet calculator that's just been posted on the FutureBeef website, which looks like, with a bit of luck, here we go, which looks like that. And it's just a basic calculator for doing the what-ifs. The blue figures are data entry, and up in the top section there you can estimate the value of the animal, and then if you go down the left-hand side you estimate the costs involved with feeding, and then if you go down the right-hand side you can estimate the cost involved with selling and buying back and can compare those costs, which will be that red circle on the right. And you can also look at it from a break-even perspective, which is the red circle on the left. It provides a break-even sale price that would be required to cover the cost of feeding. Some of the pros that you hear about for selling, it's often seen as one of the better options, particularly in hindsight. It may rain the next day, though you can adopt the attitude that it was the right decision at the time. And probably one of the benefits is that there'll be better pasture response and you've still got opportunity. People feel more in control by acting early on critical dates, and often, not always, but often by acting early, cattle weights will be higher and prices are better. And there will also be more pasture left for other stock, and the earlier it's done, then potentially less animals need to be sold. Selling controls downside risk, which can become very large and unknown, and it can have a greater impact on the business than managing for the upside risk. There's also less stress, and there's more time and opportunity to do other things and potentially pursue other income. To quote one producer, cattle are interchangeable with dollars, and dollars don't feel the dry. Finally, the most productive animals will also be the ones remaining on the property. Some of the cons is actually accepting the loss up front and potentially missing a future profit, which of course worse with a low sale price or if there's a high buyback price. But there's also potential not to buy back straight away or take on agistment. Also selling your genetics is one of the cons, and the unknowns with the quality that you're buying back. What type of genetics, fertility, temperament and disease. If we then have a look at some of the feeding pros and cons, Feeding can work well if it's not too long and not too expensive, so you can retain your stock. And also if it's well planned, if people are well organised for it, you know, have able to get their feeds ahead of time, maybe on contracts when it's cheaper, with efficient storage, processing, delivery and safety. Some of the cons, the big question is how long will it go for? And that's where I think, again, we think back to that crystal ball that we've got of, with the fodder budgets. You know, rising feed costs, it can become a high-cost exercise. There's also less time and opportunity, and there's more stress on people, on stock, soils, pastures, gear, finances. Stock may become unsaleable. Pasture damage, you know, there have been botanical changes with feeding, or delayed and reduced pasture productivity. Stock losses is another one, with poisoning, bogging, malnutrition, and at the end of the drought is another time of concern with risks of exposure or cattle chasing green pick and plant poisoning, so they're things to look out for. Right. Now, if people are looking at selling down, usually people look at selling their normal sale stock and the higher risk and least profitable stock. So examples there is preg testing and getting rid of empties, out of season or late calving cows, those with poor temperament, conformation, more susceptible to parasites, old cows, old cattle, coal heifers, poor doers, inferior bulls. So it is good to have good records to be able to identify those animals and know which are the most profitable, least valuable. If some stock were to be kept on and fed, production feeding is a potential option. You do the sums and try and figure out if the extra value outweighs the extra cost. And there's a spreadsheet that's now available on the FutureBeef website that looks like that. And so you can use that for doing, say, feeding, production type feeding or feedlot type margins. So production feeding, you know, it's going to work better if you're close to a premium, but you're not quite there and it's a short feeding period, if the feed is cheaper and there's high performance. Cull cows and wean cows could be an opportunity because that's where it's worth checking the grids and finding out where there can be sometimes very substantial price jumps by making sure you get over, for instance, getting over 200 kilograms carcass weight or over 3 mils of P8 fat. Right, custom feeding is another option, and it can work well. It may or may not be profitable, so it's another one for checking your sums. Talk to the feedlot to get the quotes. When you do your sums, check or receive your quotes, just check if it's all on as-fed or dry matter figures for your feed intakes, prices and conversions. Try and understand the charges and risks and how they're going to be sold, where they're sold. It's the ideal is to have a fairly uniform mob, and also just beware putting poor doers in because they cost a lot of money in there if they're not performing well, and poor temperament. Also, it's better if the stock goes as one pen load, because if there's mixing, there's more stress and more disease type problems. And it's also worth checking with the feedlot if any prior vaccines are recommended for respiratory disease. Agistment is another option. It can work well, and vice versa. Some of the benefits, it can avoid a feeding program, and it also can be spelling your home pasture. Lots of people send cows and calves, and it works really well. Steers is another option because they're easy management, and it could be just a one-way trip, hopefully for profit. So again, a case of doing the sums. Some of the downsides. Agistment can be pretty problematic with, well, finding it, the cost involved and distance, and if it runs out, having to find more or ending up bringing stock home. Probably the people that you're dealing with is a really important part of the equation, and also having written contracts is a good idea. Potentially there could be poor performance, different types of feeds that the animals aren't used to, which can also affect just how well it works. There is a pretty good note about agistment on the DPI, New South Wales DPI site. Right, I've just got a list of other sorts of considerations with livestock management. Well, starting with the people to start with is really trying to manage stress. No one's immune to the stress, so that's something to really look out for and getting help with. But segregating livestock will be more efficient feed costs, so that the wrong animals aren't getting the lion's share, the right ones are getting it. Early weaning is a really useful tool to help cows. If cow condition is being compromised, taking the calf off will really help the cows to hold condition, and it can work very well and help them to maintain future fertility. Keep thinking about the vaccines, 5-in-1 botulism if livestock are chewing carcasses, and droughted cattle are also more susceptible to parasites. Maintaining good waters, the infrastructure rebate is really useful here. Gradual changes in feed, that's another area where livestock can come to grief with introduced feeds, hungry animals eating too fast on something new. So if possible, try and avoid gutsing on new feeds and steady introductions. Where there may be a full feeding program, it's probably worth considering actually holding cattle in smaller paddocks. And be wearing the brake. You can do a lot of good work on maintaining the cattle, and then they may suffer from exposure, green pig, chasing green pig weeds, etc. It's also a good time to try and spell some paddocks. And keeping records is also a good idea. Right, this would be the last slide for this little section, and this is a stylized graph of cow requirements versus energy supplied from the paddock, in this case going into a dry year. So the pink line represents the energy requirements of a 500 kilogram cow. Don't worry about it being about its weight or time of calving, just the relativity applies. The pink line hits its lowest point with weaning, and then its highest point with peak lactation. The blue line represents how much energy the cow gets out of the pasture. So it's highest in the wet season, so a good wet there. And then in this example, just a steady decline with a dry year, hitting a low in October before rising again after rain. Now, we've talked about at the end of summer, that's a good time to do the forage budgets and adjust stock numbers, and with continual monitoring through the year. If cows are in good condition going into winter and at calving, then they'll have better reconception. And if there's no green feed coming into winter, then the pastures may well be protein deficient as the primary limiting nutrient, and fecal NIRS or dung sample tests can help identify this. Even tough years where you get that big gap between requirements and supply, then the cows may need some help with some higher energy and protein supplementation. If cow condition is suffering, then that early weaning will remove that nutritional drain of the milk and help them to hold or improve condition. So if we can get that rain and wet season, then that's a good time to do some spelling of the pastures to help with your desirable grasses, help with land condition. And if the soil is phosphorus deficient, then that's also the time for pea supplements to get the most out of the green feed for the livestock. And finally, their preg testing will help identify the non-performing empties to cull. So that's just section 2 done, John. So I'll hand back if there are any questions or any comments from people.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I think you're doing a really good job going through and thoroughly explaining each of the slides there. I know some of them have a bit of material there, but it's really good seeing it coming together. At this stage, there are no particular questions or comments. So folks, feel free to just type in the questions box down there if you've got any questions for Roger. But Roger, let's just move to your next section, please.
All right, feed supplies and costing nutrients. With feed supplies, it certainly pays to plan ahead and think about what would be normal strategic type supplementation. Shopping around makes a big difference with prices and trying to get feed's cheaper, but also contracts is another consideration. Also be careful if buying wet feeds, as this involves buying and freighting lots of water and handling lots of water. And also, for your interest, there is actually a list of contacts which are in the February Leading Sheep newsletter. Now, for doing that wet feeds, we'll show you later, there's a spreadsheet that can help with that to make it easier. This is a list of just an example of some of the sorts of feed costs that are around at the moment. So we're looking at grain in the 300s, chickpeas in the 400s, hay up to 380 to 500, whole cotton seed old season 500 plus, and expectation for new season from April, this is ex-Moree, 385 plus. There are feedlot rations and calf pellets available, sort of in that range, 380 to 500 plus. And molasses will be available with the next crush, unless people have already got contracts. If we look at the protein meals down below as a guide, it's all very tight, and most of them will be coming back on in April or May. But probably the one that stands out there with only reasonable supplies at the top is the palm kernel meal. And it's got comparable sort of price to a grain. Now, in terms of costing nutrients, well, this is just one approach in comparing feed options, and you can cost the nutrient that you're looking for, so typically energy and protein, or maybe phosphorus. And the things you need to know is the dollars per tonne, the dry matter percentage, and the nutrient level, either on a dry matter or a as-fed basis. Then you can, once you've got that detail, which is not always easy to get, but once you've got that information, then you can cost your energy, for instance, on cents per megajoule of metabolizable energy, or just units of energy, or dollars per kilogram of crude protein. Now, there are, of course, a whole lot of other factors that influence the choice, such as those listed down below. All right. Now, to give an example, this is just a really simple example of costing energy. So if we said we had grain at $300 a tonne, it's 30 cents a kilogram, and grain is about 12 megajoules on a dry matter basis. It's diluted a bit by water. That brings it back to about 10 as fed, with 3 cents for 1 megajoule. If you look at silage, they're at $100 a tonne. It's 10 cents a kilogram. On a dry matter basis, if it's nice silage, it might have about 10 megajoules of energy, which is up, to put the spectrum, grain is up around 12, straw is down around 6, so that gives you a bit of a spectrum on the energy levels. So nice silage at 10 megajoules, but then because it could have about 70% water, that dilutes it back. For every kilogram as fed, 700 grams of water, 300 grams of dry matter, times 10 megajoules, you've got 3 megajoules there. So 10 cents for 3 megajoules, 3.3 cents per megajoule. So anytime you're dealing with something with high water content, just take the time to do the sums. This is examples of costing protein on your screen now, I hope. Just a simple example, say early season cottonseed, $200 a tonne, and in a tonne, if it's about 22% protein, then you could have about 200 kilograms of protein, crude protein in a tonne. So $200 for 200 kilograms of protein, $1 a kilogram of crude protein. But now it's probably more like the 550. So that not everything follows the rules. Again, as mentioned, it's just one way of costing it. Copra doesn't follow the rules. You can compare their cottonseed meal, say both at the same price, cottonseed meal about 40% protein as fed, and copra say 20% as fed. So you've got twice as much protein there from the cottonseed meal. Therefore, the dollar per kg of crude protein is double for copra. But if, for instance, you fed out, say, half a kg to dry stock on pasture, low protein pasture, you could get a similar response. So ultimately, it's really the response, the cost to response is a better indicator than costing the nutrient. But it's certainly a good place to start. Cottonseed meal on the whole is a more consistent product than copra, or if you were putting it in molasses, you're going to certainly benefit by having double the protein. Right, you're all sitting down for the next slide. It looks a bit horrible when it just pops up, but it's pretty simple. And this spreadsheet's available on the website as well. The blue figures are data entry, and so really if you just break it down to one row at a time, it's very simple. So if we looked at the silage up the top, you'd put in the price per tonne and whatever the freight is, and it'll just calculate the landed price. And then you would enter the dry matter percentage, say 32%, and you'd enter what the megajoules rating is. In this case, the blue one there is dry matter, so that tells you that it's 2.7 as fed. So if it's 21 cents for 2.7 megajoules as fed, that's 7.7 cents per megajoule. And on this list, when there are some buttons at the top, so if you enable macros, you can sort it on energy, which is that green column, or you can sort on protein, which is the yellow column. And it'll put the lowest cost at the bottom, so you can see grain and palm kernel down the bottom there. And so it shows that impact of moisture, even though the top two are the cheapest per tonne, they're the most expensive on dry matter. And cottonseed meal is on the right there. For the examples we have here, it's the cheapest one for protein, but we don't have a lot of protein type supplements in there. Okay, so yes, you can have a play around with that. There is also a cost calculator on the New South Wales website. So if you just Google the cost calculator, you can find that. It does the same thing. Working out average intakes, people sometimes ask, if the stock are getting enough feed or supplement. And this example looks at 15% urea dry lick with 52% protein, costing $800 a tonne. So if you know how many kilos you put out to how many cattle and how long it lasts, so 210 kilograms for 100 head for 7 days, so 210 divided by 100 divided by 7, and the average is 300 grams per head per day. And then we can say, well, 15% of that gives us 45 grams of urea, and 52% crude protein gives us 156 grams of crude protein, which is pretty much on track for a dry lick like this. That would be the sort of targets that you'd be looking for. And if it's 80 cents a kilogram for 0.3 kg, 24 cents a head a day. Right. There's a lot more information available. There's Queensland DAF has the dry season management booklet. There's similar on New South Wales and Victoria websites. There's also some information there, good information available on goats and horses, and there's some more sheep sites will be at the end of the presentation. Right, well that's covered that third section, John.
That's great, Roger, and you're doing really well for time too, by the way. You're spot on with where we need to be. So we do actually have a question, but other people are very welcome to type their questions or comments down in that questions box. So the question, Roger, is what's the minimum body weight that you'd recommend to wean calves down to without feeding milk replacer or compromising body weight or average daily weight gain?
Right. Well, people often talk about age, and probably around 2 months of age would be where you could potentially start with just going to dry feeds and not having to go through a milk program. But that may be down around 70 kg, 60, 70 kg. It's been done successfully with cattle down around those sort of weights. So, trying to minimise stress and having that high protein, for instance, going on to pellets and having some roughage available. And often the pellets, it's good to look for ones which have got something like Rumensin or Bovatec in it, which act as a coccidiostat. And they can go ahead quite well. Again, thinking about trying to minimise stress for those little guys, having everything prepared and ready, and having a good environment, good hygiene, minimising dust. Dust is a big problem, for respiratory disease. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's good. Now, you mentioned about cottonseed before. Are there any problems feeding that to horses?
I don't know. I would be thinking you wouldn't want to have too much of it. Yeah, it's not good for monogastrics because of the toxic element in it, gossypol, and for the same reason that's not good for those baby calves either. Try to stay away from cottonseed for a while with those little guys. Yeah, I'd be a bit concerned about whole cottonseed for horses because of the gossypol.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the other listeners has confirmed that, saying that gossypol is toxic to horses. So you're right on the money there, Roger.
Great. Thank you.
And just a comment that on the last screen, they noticed that molasses was very expensive. Is that right, Roger?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe someone can say with the price. The sort of price I heard at the end of last year was, say, around 140 ex the coast, say some from Serena, in that sort of order, and then whatever jump up that goes with freight.
And of course, that was just an example of the spreadsheet that you were showing, so people can find the actual figures and put that in. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And while we're on that molasses, I've just put 0 protein for molasses. Theoretically, it does have molasses in, protein in molasses, but generally we've just sort of discounted it as being of not good quality. So, yeah.
Okay, well, on to the next section.
Rightio. The last section is producers' reflections on drought. And this comes from a review that was done in New South Wales in 2003 by David Llewellyn, and full details of this is available on their website. But this is just a quick breakdown on some of their major points. So producers nominated that their best decision was destocking to critical dates, and their worst decision was not acting early enough. The key messages focused on forward planning. Knowing what you're going to do when was the key to staying in control. Of crucial importance was to have a plan, setting critical dates, to progress personal educational needs, and to have a strategy for recovery. And then they listed 13 key lessons that they learned, and which include that drought occurs when stocking rate exceeds carrying capacity. So drought's not only rainfall induced. Humans control stocking rate. Nature controls carrying capacity. Success in drought is achieved in the same way as at other times, which is to use sound business management principles. Start with goals. Write and communicate the plan and recovery plan. Plan now for next time. Write the plan down. Put the plan in the folder and don't lose the folder. And fine-tune the plan regularly. Number 7, move early, remain positive, keep in touch with positive people, set critical dates, beware the emotional load and share the responsibility with family members, and don't be afraid to seek help. Watch out for unmanageable equity losses, look on mistakes as learning opportunities, preserve the resource base for financial recovery and future generations. And then they also had a section about finance and about the land, but they also had one on people, and this is what they said about people: was staying positive and in control, being an opportunist, maintaining harmonious communications within business and family, and ensure networking and educational needs are met. So that's just a quick wrap up. They had a lot more details which you can find on the web, but that's a quick summary of it, which then brings us to the end, John. There's lots of different information available.
You've done very well there, thanks Roger. Special thanks out to Kiri and Jody, who've been doing some tweeting for us, just keeping a wider audience informed. So folks, this is your opportunity to type some questions down the bottom. So Roger, we do have a couple here for you. So a comment regarding cottonseed, and this person thinking that they've heard that you shouldn't give it to bulls because it can help them become infertile. Does that sound right to you?
If they were sort of really gutsing on cottonseed and trying to live off cottonseed, then they're going to run into problems for sure. It's circumstantial evidence that goes back to about '86, where there was a bull on cottonseed that became sterile, but it wasn't conclusive evidence. And certainly during past droughts, there have been lots of bulls on cottonseed, and there was a vet down at St George that checked a lot of bulls, and his conclusion was they were better off for getting it than not getting it. But depending on your attitude to risk with it, if they're just getting a moderate amount, like probably up to 2 kg daily, but not being able to just guts on it, it probably wouldn't be too bad. If you want to go on the lower risk side, then drop back from there. But cattle can break down gossip pole in the rumen, but you definitely don't want it to be a big part of the diet. And cottonseed, like it's a fantastic supplement, drought feed, high energy, high protein. It's got some fibre in it, good phosphorus. You know, it on paper looks fantastic, and people say they self-regulate on it. But I think they tend to self-regulate by actually gutsing and then not eating for a while and then gutsing, a bit like binge drinking. And so that's not the ideal way. It is better if possible. I mean, you can let cattle just have free access to cottonseed, dump a truckload, go to bed at night and sleep. But it is better if possible to have it intermittent, and lots of people say they find that they get better results because then you get, the rumen gets all the benefits of a bit of protein, energy, phosphorus, rather than getting overloaded. There's 20% oil in cottonseed, and so if they guts on it, they've got 20% oil in the rumen, and you don't want more than 5% oil in the rumen if you want to have better fibre digestion. So, yeah, so the bottom line with cottonseed, it is better, you know, like putting out 2 or 3 kg every third day sort of thing, you know, putting it out twice a week or something like that. So, yeah, small amounts for the bulls is okay, and I'd probably still take that same approach. The younger the animal, the more it may affect them.
Okay, well, we've got a few comments on this. Jeff Knight did a trial out at St George with some rams, and they fed them a lot, but there was no effect on fertility, so thanks for that. And someone's heard that bulls consuming over 6 kilograms per head per day are at risk, and below that it's fine, apparently. But then someone else says an infertile bull is better than a dead bull. So there we go.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Good. So yes, people are getting the idea of sending in questions and comments now, so they're starting to come in. So what sort of silage was used in the comparison that you gave before, Roger, and how does corn silage stack up?
All right, that was just a generic example previously, demonstrating the moisture. I'd imagine corn silage would be very good, and certainly you can get an analysis done, a lot of the dairy people do, and find out what sort of energy and protein you have. But yeah, no, it would be very good. And again, it's like all of these things, if you can get analyses or get to find out what the nutrients are, then you know what you're working with. And again, if you're looking at costing things, keep in mind that impact of moisture. With the corn silage, again, you know, the more grain that's in it, the higher the energy and the better the quality will be as well.
Okay. Just a reminder to everyone that today's webinar is being recorded, and it'll be available on the FutureBeef website later on. And once we've got it there, we'll send everyone who has registered a link. And we'll also include on the website a copy of Roger's presentation. So if you've missed things there, you can easily go back and look them up. Another one here, so let's see. So yeah, and people are saying, Roger, that they've really enjoyed your presentation and that they're amazed at how many tools are available out there to assist producers with drought management. So well done. What considerations, Roger, should be made for protein, so bypass versus rumen degradable?
Right. The animals that are more likely to benefit from bypass protein are going to be young growing, fast growing stock and lactating cows, because they're the ones that have got the highest protein requirements. Otherwise, often, whatever feed goes into the rumen, the bacteria break it down, and you've got the bacterial population, and they convert protein in the rumen that comes into the rumen. They'll just break it down and then rebuild themselves, and then those bacteria get washed through, and they become the bulk of the protein source to the animal. And generally, that can be satisfactory, but otherwise, yeah, those young animals, some of that bypass can just help to get extra protein to the animal that you wouldn't otherwise get. So, but it's usually in high performance situations, so it's probably not going to be as big an issue in lower performance situations. But that's where things like cottonseed meal and copra meal are pretty good for those young animals. I'm not sure if that really answers your question properly.
Sounds good. Thanks, Roger. So just a final one here, although more are coming in. So question here for you, Roger. I've been feeding lupins during the dry and when we still had some dry feed. Also had urea licks out to help sheep with that. Now we've had some rain and the primary feed is short green pick. I'm considering changing to Graze Max dry powder lick to help supplement the short green pick. I'm still feeding roughly 200 grams per day. Do you have any suggestions for handling the change?
I'm not sure what the Graze Max does, but yeah, one of the considerations when it's just short green pick is actually, if you can, it is good to be able to keep up a feed program. They may not want to use it. Sometimes it's better to actually keep the stock locked up for a while and keep feeding until there's a good response. And because whatever it's just really short green pick, it's pretty much green filmy water, and it's short, so they're going to be spending a fair bit of energy trying to consume water. And that's where some animals can come to grief if they're not strong enough to get through that period. And that's where maintaining still good energy type ration and for several weeks until there's a decent body of feed for them to eat. And then after that, if it is phosphorus deficient country, then that's where you think about maybe phosphorus, because you'll have good energy and you'll have good protein, and the animals will perform better and eat more if they've got that phosphorus. But you need to know if you've actually got a deficiency first. That's an underlying principle, is what's the primary limiting nutrient, and there's no point giving a nutrient if it's not the primary limiting nutrient. So yeah, that's what I'd be thinking there, is if possible, try and keep up some good feed to them for a bit longer. It's a bit painful to think about, but I am aware where some animals have come to grief chasing green pick.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
And Roger, just looking ahead, is there a list of how long different commodities or proteins last in storage?
That's a good question. When I say that, that means I don't really know. Yeah, I don't know. Whole cottonseed, I believe, will store for years. Yeah, I'm just not really sure how long they go, before the mice and the weevils start to get in. I've heard cottonseed meal may last a bit longer than copra, for instance. But yeah, I'm not really sure, sorry. But maybe the feed companies that supply it would have better idea there. Or if there's other people in the audience might be able to answer that one.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Roger. We're getting short on time, so we'll finish there. But Roger, thanks very much for the presentation you've given today. It's very informative, a lot of information there. So yeah, on behalf of the audience, thank you, and we appreciate the time and effort that you've obviously put into it. Now, folks, before you go, can I just mention, that's okay, can I just mention that the Beef Connect webinars are a partnership between Beef Central and FutureBeef. So I'm hoping that you all get the daily emails from Beef Central. If you haven't signed up to those yet, just pop over to their website and do so. And also, don't forget to visit our FutureBeef website, which Roger mentioned several times. We'll keep you on the payroll. And this is your one-stop shop for beef information across Northern Australia. And in due course, this is where you'll find our webinar recording, as I said, I'll send everyone an email with the direct link after today's event. And on our website, we do actually have a dedicated page for drought information. So if you go to topics and then drop down to drought here, you'll find the latest information there, and you'll find a link to a number of useful publications. Now, of course, we'll be asking for your feedback on today's event. We'll be doing that online so as to save some trees, and that way we can always read what you write, whereas when you do the handwritten evaluations, for me it's always a challenge to decipher the writing. But this way, you can type in your comments. So I'll include a link to that also in my follow-up email. So folks, thanks for coming along today. It's been great to have such a diverse audience from across here, particularly Northern Australia, and also some Southerners as well. I'd like to thank Roger again for sharing his knowledge and insights with us today. And a big thank you to all our attendees for coming along today and interacting with us. So all the best until we connect again. Hooroo for now.